Let's go. It's Wednesday.
Let's
Late
get it
Wednesday.
on.
Yes.
We're
Looks
live,
like
baby.
it's still sunny near you, Precious. Actually, it's pretty much sunny everywhere right now. I mean, in the northern hemisphere at least.
Yes,
How you been? You're a little bit of a local national traveler the last couple of days, aren't you?
I am, man. I had to check the calendar last time we were on. I was like, am I going to be back in time for Wednesday? Yes. So
Yeah.
we literally just got in last night. So it was really good to move about the cabin, right? So my sister-in-law just got married. The wedding
Awesome.
was originally planned for last year, but needless to say, didn't happen then. So
Hmm.
we said, yeah, you know what? We're going to get out here and we're going to, we're going to participate. We're going to fully show up. So loaded up the kids, the hubs, and got on the plane and we did our tour of the Midwest. So
Yeah. I
in and out of
had.
Chicago. I don't know how many hours on the road because from Chicago to Cleveland was about 7, I think. And then
Whew.
coming back, we stopped in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and spent a couple days there to visit with family. So it was all good, and we're all
Yeah.
still intact. So it was definitely worthwhile.
Everyone survived.
We did, but and we'll get to business here. So the first time, and I've flown a lot. You guys have to understand that for a couple years, that was my job, was to travel and train.
Yeah.
So it was this really bizarre thing. We were landing last night, and when I tell you that the airplane, I was just ready for landing gear to hit the runway. We were down that low, and then all of a sudden, they pulled back up.
Oh, really?
I was like, because I was bracing for, the typical rumble, I had my 7-year-old next to me, but no, we were airborne again. And the pilot got on and said, we were following too close behind the one that landed before us. And so we're going to circle around and come back. And I was like, whoa, what is that about? So yeah,
Hmm.
it's really strange, but no, at least, hey, look, we landed a second time
Yeah.
and we're allowed to deplane that time. So yeah, never
You were
had that
two for
happen.
two, or at least the pilot was 2 for 2. That's
There you
good.
go. Absolutely. We're gonna share that one because I was like, I don't know if that's common, and I've just never experienced it. But we were literally about on the ground, and
Yeah.
then it was just like, and I was like, nope, the gravity's going the wrong way, guys.
Heather's already in the comments. She's chilling out after
Yay!
How to CPCU earlier, where we had
There you
Abby
go.
Clow talking about her book that she just released and published. Yeah, never like those fake outs for landings. Scary. I would agree. Luckily, I haven't had to deal with too much of that in my life, but the most annoying things I've ever had were like long waits on runways and things like that. So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, hailing from the Northeast, flying during the winter just sucks. I mean, it's
Ugh,
like,
I can imagine.
and especially if you spent any time in Chicago for work. I mean, Chicago is just like that. We just de-iced the plane 5 minutes ago. What do you mean we got to de-ice again?
Oh yeah,
Um,
ground stops. Gotta love them.
Yes. Without further ado, this is like a CPCU.
Yay!
Remember to like, comment, subscribe, share, hit the notification bell, retweet. We are a production of the Agents and Brokers Interest Group as part of the CPCU Society. And we talk about sales tips, tricks, philosophies. We had Brian Falchuk on last week talking about how to be a super duper sales leader in
Yes.
terms of some of the more squishy stuff that goes into being a really good manager and
Squishy stuff.
yes, yeah, the
Warm
nougat,
fuzzy.
right? Like
There you go.
to pull
Ooh.
into Snickers parlance. It's like the nougaty part, It's not like the peanuts or the
I
caramel.
was about to say,
It's
does that
like,
make us the nuts, or how does that work? Okay.
yeah. I am most definitely nuts. I'll tell you that much.
Okay, fine. I'll be the chocolate.
3 children, 2 dogs, what the heck are those little lizards?
Oh, jeez.
Whatever dragon, bearded dragon that my son had. We are just insanity personified. So yes, I will take that moniker. I am
Got
nuts. But that being said, this week we are kind of stealing, or we're inspired by,
There you go.
borrowing, the idea of the most recent IG Roadshow, and they had talked about, kind of doing business in a hard market. And so they had a number of people. It was extremely well received, well attended, well run, fantastic event or seminar in terms of the production that they put on.
Absolutely.
They had a range of perspectives. So they had someone from the carrier side. They had someone who did more program-based type stuff and captive type stuff. They had some folks from the retail side. And so I thought we would just take this opportunity to kind of like talk about, from our perspective, our beats from, hard markets of yore, so to speak,
Hmm.
and what that selling environment was like as compared to, say, maybe the prior, 5 to 10 years that we've been, dealing with in terms of the retail insurance space.
Hmm.
Um, Let me ask you first, kind of like, I guess, a technical question. Like, what would you classify as a hard market?
Ooh, 2020. No, I kid.
Yeah.
No, I mean, but rightfully so, right? And so, it's cyclical. And
Mm,
that's one of the things, this topic is trending. I think, like you said, the Roadshow addressed it. I was recently part of the, ERMI Transportation Risk Conference, and that was my, speaking point too, is what do you do in the middle of this market? How do you really advocate for your customers? How do you help them navigate through, these treacherous times?
mm,
And so it's definitely, the buzz right now. And so, before you can really appreciate why this stuff comes and goes, it's not like playing red light, green light when you're a kid. Yeah, even though it feels like it, right? We kind of look at, just kind of the perfect storm that is happening, right? You've got
yeah.
multiple catastrophes in the last couple of months, even, just last couple of years, severity has increased. We get into investments, when the you know the return on, because again, we all know that's where insurance companies make their money.
Yeah.
It's what how they invest the premiums that they bring in. And so when that margin is low, it's the perfect storm for the tightening of the belt.
Yeah.
I specialize in transportation, there's no secret there. And the trucking industry, you compound that with some of these nuclear verdicts
Yeah.
that are happening more and more.
Ooh,
And so
commercial auto liability. Ooh, oh my God. Oh,
that DNO is taking a really hard nosedive right now.
yeah.
So it's like, if you've been doing this for a couple of years, we are not in the season of, I think about those commercials that used to come on, oh, let the banks compete for you, and, that sort of thing. you know, the carriers aren't throwing extra spiffs your way. They're not negotiating the terms. It's not
Yep.
one of those, like I remember when the mortgage, um, when those percentages change and like, oh, if you haven't refied, you're leaving money on the table and it's not, everyone's got to go to the bank and renegotiate their terms. That is not where we are
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
Today, if you have a flat renewal, if they renewed for expiring, that's a blessing,
Ooh, oh
because
yeah.
right now we're not seeing that. We're seeing just unprecedented increases, and, shy of payroll and fuel, like in the trucking space, this insurance is a big chunk of their overhead. So people are really choking on, this hardening market, especially if they don't have the context to why this happens.
Oh yeah. Which like fantastic transition, because one of my first points was it's like you're in my head. One of my first points was going to be straight out of the gate. The best defense is a good offense, right? Like,
Hmm.
and so as a broker, sometimes you're basically telling the client, like, don't kill the messenger, right?
Oh
Like
yeah.
you have nothing to do with the market dynamics, and in most cases, the insured themselves don't
Hmm.
necessarily have to do anything to do with the market dynamics, or at least there's one small, very small piece of it, but just informing them ahead of time and helping them budget ahead.
Oh
And
yeah.
this is kind of like a couple of points in one. It's, you got to let them know that the pain is coming ahead of
Hmm.
time, right? Like, prepare them, which kind of comes with that, like, the UPOD, like the under promise and over deliver, right?
Oh
Like,
yeah.
set reasonable expectations, and then, if you do, uh, if you are able to basically beat out those kind of like conservative estimates, then it's going to sit a lot better with the client, right?
Hmm.
And then that also goes hand in hand with having a close carrier relationship and being able to have like whoever your marketing rep or the senior underwriter that you deal with, whoever your first point of contact is for this stuff, especially if you have somewhat of like a homogeneous book of business,
Hmm.
just be like, look, no BS. Like, where are we going? Right? Like,
Yeah.
what are rates going to look like? And if it's bad news, you have to say, look, just tell me what the bad news is, because if I can
Hmm.
prep my clients, at the very least they know what's going. And if I know that you're being upfront with me, I'll also give you last look.
Oh
So
yeah.
if I do have to go out and market this piece of business, I'm not just going to go like, sacrifice you over 5 points on a 30% increase.
Hmm.
I'm going to go like at least give you last shot so that you can try and hold on to it. Right. Um,
Absolutely.
but yeah, I mean, that's really an important piece, is that carrier conversation and then how that filters through to how you're informing your clients. Are you typically doing it over the phone, face to, well, I mean, obviously COVID, a little bit different, but if you had your druthers, face to face, over the phone, email, how are you usually kind of delivering that, prognostication?
Basically how we've built our shop is we are more or less a digital presence,
Hmm.
and so in transportation, that's kind of the nature of the beast because our customers are literally on the road.
Yeah.
Unless I'm gonna meet them at like the TA or something, there's really not a whole lot.
the,
Hey, showers on me, and I'll get you a cup of
the
coffee.
Yeah, the meatloaf and mashed potato special, and talk a little insurance. Yeah,
There you go, the blue plate.
yeah,
So, but no, I mean, like I said, it's more of preparing them, right? And so
yeah,
I think, to what you said earlier, depending on the makeup of your book, in addition to, because we assume that a hardening market just means that rates are going to increase.
yeah,
But what we're seeing more and more as well are certain carriers are pulling out of certain exposures,
yeah.
right? And so they're just like, hey, look, we just don't have the experience, we don't have the numbers, for this to make sense anymore. And so that's always a big, that's a hard pill to swallow because typically, we can kind of fall back on, oh, well, there's a material change to the exposure
Mhm.
because you did something. But how do you go back and tell them, like, they just don't like your kind?
Yeah.
They've decided that, I remember years ago, the book that I ran, it was so bizarre. I had a client that they were doing piano lessons. Right, they did piano lessons, and that was a non-renewal that we're no longer covering this class of business. And like, how is it possible that? Oh, thanks, Mike. It's like, how is it possible that this is like, is this a problematic class? Are you guys getting like really riled up? You're banging keys? Like, what is happening? How are they
Yeah.
pulling out?
Kids freaking out. Yeah.
Right, you're making kids cry, like ears are. But again, the numbers, the numbers, the numbers.
Mm.
We take it for granted that when we have a rate, that the rate just materializes from somewhere, and we forget that all the actuaries hard at work. They've got to have a certain number of data points for it to make sense. They got to have
Yep.
certain longevity for it to make sense. So they're not going to spend all this time crunching the ins and outs of the profitability of a class code for the
Yep.
three customers they've got on the books.
Yep.
So sometimes that's hard because it starts to feel almost like you're playing duck duck goose. You're
Yeah.
like, okay, so that's not open. Who else is taking these? How much are we going to have to do to get it placed? And is it going to resemble what we left? And again, from a customer's perspective, because we talk shop all day, we understand how this goes. But
Mm.
how do you explain to a customer that if what you had before is not on the table, in other words, you're being non-renewed or the renewal term's different, then it's not apples to apples to hold on to what you used to have and
Mhm.
compare that to what's available moving forward. There's a reason that wasn't, viable.
I think Mike might have done your client in. Mike,
There you
Mike
go.
saying he's still traumatized by piano lessons. Just remember, Mike, when there's psychological trauma, it has to have a physical manifestation. Just
Oh boy.
so. At least to qualify for a bodily injury claim. Um, so yeah, no. To your point, I think that's also extremely difficult. Like you said, to explain to your client base, like regardless of whatever their business is, especially one of those businesses where, like it's a little mom and pop in an industry that's mostly mom and pops,
Hmm.
and you're like, okay, well, they can't charge you $80,000 for your insurance because you just don't make that much every single
Right.
year. And on top of that, there's only so many of your exposures that are out there, if they can't collect enough of them together,
Hmm.
the first time they get hit with that six-figure claim, it just completely destroys that book of business.
Oh
And
yeah.
so it could be one or five claims that basically do in an entire program or book of business. And so, yeah, that's really difficult to explain. And that also raises another interesting point. It's like you have certain times where the hard market almost seems like it's across the board,
Hmm.
right? Where it's just systemic economic pressure or market pressure that's causing almost every other, every line of coverage to increase in price, or some of these kind of like coverage restrictions to take place, or some of these carriers to exit the market. And then at other points in time, it's more, kind of localized
Hmm.
to one or a handful of different lines of coverage, which gives you a couple like it's a little bit better, I guess, in the sense that it gives you a couple more like arrows in your quiver, because you can present a renewal that's a package of coverages. And if you're presenting it and you can kind of like, not necessarily rob Peter to pay Paul, but if you can get competitive on one line and save a little bit, the hard market gets cushioned a little bit on the other side. And so that also makes it a little bit easier to deal with. And by the way, if you're, conservatively telling them, look, half of your renewal is work comp, we're seeing those rates go up 10%, and you come in with a, plus 4% overall renewal for the package because you saved on, the property or the liability or something, that helps a lot, because even though that one isolated line of coverage looks ugly, the what you were able to do on the other side of it helps kind of like, window dress it and make it a little bit more, palatable. um, but then again, there are those time periods where it's just like, what, you're gonna get a plus 20. It's
Hmm.
just, it's coming, like you're gonna get a plus
You're going
20,
to take it on the chin.
yeah.
It's happening to everyone, and that's just kind of the nature of the beast. And like you said, because we see it with the frequency, our customers, it's just their policy. They're not in the business of working with insurance.
Mm,
you know Making, again, just context. I think context is really helpful just in anything, right? Kind of
mm,
like when you go to the doctor before they give you the shot. It's like, hey, you're gonna feel pressure, it's gonna sting, it's gonna burn, you're gonna want to kick me. Like, tell me what I'm gonna experience, and that way, I've already wrapped my mind around it before I just get blindsided by something. you
mm-hmm,
know and so it's one of those. This is really where we shine as advisors.
yeah,
This is really where the rubber meets the road. This is what differentiates us from some AI, algorithm.
mm,
So from a generic, unseen, face. This is where you get to explain and really just navigate someone through. It's almost like, and again, you either hate it or love it, right? Like if you go somewhere with someone who's been there before,
yeah,
and like, oh yeah, watch your step here. This is where it's going to get slippery. This is where it's going to be fun, and so you're able to kind of tell them, right now, this is kind of the layout, right? This going to get, like the plane analogy, right? I said I hated the surprise, the fake
yes,
landing. you know when the pilot sees bad weather ahead and they turn on that, I think Heather made a comment about, the buckle up. When they're able to warn you the turbulence that's on the way, then you can
mm,
brace for it. It's, okay, now's not a great time to try to sip my drink, right? So
yeah.
here comes the road bump. And I really think that, again, context, a heads up, and then we get into the meat of, because it's not something that's just throw your hands up and, you have zero impact into the outcome. There are some
Yeah,
measures that we can take, especially at these renewals, to kind of help to just really make sure that we get the most desirable outcomes possible.
yeah,
Anything right now, I think, while the market is hardening and is going, like the transportation, it's been hard for a while, and we didn't think it was going to get harder, but here we are.
mm-hmm,
Um, so all of the proactive things that we do in risk management, all of the things that we can equip our customers with to try to avoid, mitigate, minimize losses, are really going to be key right now,
Mm,
because when the lines are razor thin and that loss ratio is going to be, what's going to tip the scale, then we have to hold our breath and not, poke the bear, right?
yeah.
And so making sure that our customers understand, hey, look, these are the premiums, but these are some things that it might behoove you to finally implement. Have you thought about some of the tech that's out there, some of the proactive things that you can install, alarms, sensors, things like that, so that goodness forbid if something should happen,
Mhm.
then we can't, well, some of these things obviously can change the frequency, but the severity, right? So like some of
Yeah.
the things, like we had the episode with Purple Ant, talking about, the leak sensors and things like that. It's like sometimes, again, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. If we
Yeah.
can hold off on using the insurance as heavily as we have in the past, because we don't want this one extra loss to be what, kind of pushes you out of contention, and just makes, the whole program go into a tailspin.
Oh yeah, which is a good point because some of those carriers that end up doing a partial exit, right? They're just kind of like, trimming the risks that, maybe they don't non-renew, but they're obviously trying to price themselves out of being on that risk.
Hmm.
If you are one of those risks that is one of the better ones, you can end up sticking with that carrier and not getting as bad of a renewal. But like you said, you can't poke the bear, right? Like you can't
Hmm.
have an oops in the middle of that process. So anything that you can do to kind of like stop that from happening is going to be a positive. Heather said, "Did you just say buckle up? This is going to suck." Hashtag embrace the suck. Yeah, sometimes. I mean, this also kind of comes into play with if you're upfront and you're telegraphing the rate pressure. Certain clients within your book of business are going to be able to build that into their business model.
Yes.
So while they might not necessarily be like, happy with it, I mean, there could also be, I mean, right now we are starting to see, I don't know if it will continue. I am not an economist, but we are starting to see inflationary pressures in
Hmm.
many industries and in many commodities. Well, if you have a hard market in insurance for certain providers, they can pass off some or all of that cost to
Yep.
their client base. Um, the key is going to be what they're going to be concerned about is they don't want to have to necessarily pass along more than say their competitor does
Hmm.
because then they're going to be outcompeted on price in the marketplace. So that's one thing that you can really work with them and say, look, this is going to suck, but you might have to, push some of these costs off to your competitors. And you know what? In some cases, there are probably businesses right now that are operating business units that have been borderline not profitable
Hmm.
or had razor thin margins for a long time. And the only reason that they continue to operate at that level is because of low interest rates, because of low run costs or low insurance costs. And so the hard market does also have a way of shaking those things out as well. Um, and sometimes it sucks because I mean, say that's a business unit that your client is very much attached to, or
Hmm.
I mean, hell, they could be operating it for 50 or 100 years, and it's just become either outmoded or something else has taken its place over time. So a lot of that has to do with that kind of like give and take and that consultative role of almost like being involved in that business consulting conversation that's happening with your client. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, yeah,
The
embrace the suck. I
economics of it,
mean,
because what
yeah,
it boils down to is the elasticity of whatever they're doing, right?
mm,
Can they pass that off? Is their market or whatever they do, is it that price sensitive? Will the price increase result in overall decreased revenues because they just aren't going to be able to move the volume that they've used before?
right,
There are certain things that, again, that are inelastic, that regardless of, you know, price changes, we have to have it, right? I'm thinking like health, care, for example, your doctors and things like that. When I think about inflation and again some of those other economic factors out there, overhead and profit is really what it boils down to. you
hmm
know and so again, some folks are able to bake that in, to include that, to account for that, but they have to know what to account for. You
Yeah.
know, if they get hit by a bill after the fact because they've been budgeting on it, per the expiring, and they didn't even know it was happening, then it may cause a hiccup because, depending on, like you said, who you're working with. I know I used to work with a lot of nonprofits, and they had to set those budgets. Board meetings happen prior to, right? And so it's really hard for them to go back and try to earmark additional funds
Mm,
if they didn't know that they were going to have to, which is where, some of the losses that happen, how they impact the market, are more obvious than others. I think people, for the most part, they understand the influx with property because they've seen the storms, they watched the chaos, they've, heard the news about the, lumber being hard to come across, and shingles right now are hard to come across, and, these different things, and that's more obvious, right? That makes
yeah.
sense. But when you get like these big DNO increases, that's a little bit more. Again, that's where we start getting into this whole intangibility of insurance. And as far as they're concerned, because here's the other thing too, for the most part, they understand that we get paid off a commission.
Hmm.
Right. And so there's always that piece that are like, well, yeah, you're not sorry.
It's it's
You're
it's
about to take
back
a
here. It's
percentage of
like
that
you're
income.
making bank. Like,
Oh yeah,
yeah,
they're like, you get to party off of my pain, and
yeah,
so that's like their knee jerk reaction. That's all, you guys are all in cahoots.
yeah.
Oh, the price went up, and all of a sudden, your car changes. But
Well,
um,
and that's a really good point. I'm sorry if I'm cutting you off,
no,
but
go for it.
uh, like don't feel like you have to bleed with the customer.
Hmm.
Okay, because this is again, it depends on your business model, but some agencies have run into the problem where during hard markets they gave away those percentage points of commission
Hmm.
and were never able to get them back.
Right.
And so that, that promise of like, you bleed a little, I bleed a little, the prosperity part of it, ends up benefiting the client, which is all well and good, but it would have benefited them anyway once
Hmm.
you go back to, a softer market, or at least a more stable rate environment. And so yeah, I've seen some books of business been pretty much decimated
Hmm.
because they want, the broker wanted to hold on to the business during a hard market, and the problem was like, that 15 points or 10 points, now all of a sudden they're making 6 or 7, and then
Mm,
once the market gets soft, now all of a sudden
you
your
can't build that
running
back in.
costs are
Yeah.
too high associated with, what your profitability is. So always something to keep in mind. So sorry, I cut you
No,
off,
I
but
mean that's a really good point because I've seen, especially like on the fee end of it,
mm,
where, I never worked somewhere that we've actually moved the needle on the commission part of it. But,
yeah,
sometimes if there's fees, they may negotiate some fees just to try to, retain something.
mm,
But again, it goes back to preparing them, kind of the do's and don'ts while the market is hardening,
mm,
shopping around. I think now more than anything, that longevity piece matters, right? And so
yeah,
the incumbent is going to be more motivated to keep that business on the books because, as we all remember, like from our classes, the first couple years that policy rolls on, that is a liability. It's not yet an asset to the company. They
yep,
have all those front loaded costs from commissions to marketing, those, again, the cost of the goods that they're still trying to recoup. And
yep,
so, oftentimes, again, being very specific and very precise with your target premium when you are marketing, remarketing, whatever the case may be, you need to communicate that. Hey, look, this particular account, I think that that extra, 5% is going to be the make or break
mhm,
between whether or not I can convince them to stick and stay or if they're going to force my hand to move. Do you
yep,
really want to, put it on the line, or is there any pricing available?
right,
Right. And it doesn't hurt to ask, because every carrier is different in terms of what the underwriters are able to do. If they have a window, of debits and credits that they can, adjust.
mhm,
Again, depending on how long they've been with that account, on that account, and how desirable it is for them to stay on it. So it never hurts to ask the question. I know that, larger books, oftentimes the MO is just renew per expiring, let that little inflation kicker do its thing. But for the most part, we're just going in, trying to get in and come out the same way
yep,
year over year, keep those installments the same. But, that's the other thing too. We have to be really precise with our submissions.
Yeah.
We've
Yeah.
got to go in and reevaluate.
So and that's a fantastic point as well, is if you are um, just kind of getting to renewal every single year, and you're not necessarily kind of really adjusting what you're sending to underwriting, or in many cases not even sending anything to underwriting, they're
Hmm.
just spitting out a renewal quote. um, you seriously have to, like, the reason why you shouldn't be ashamed to make more in a hard market as a broker is because this is when, like, there's two times when a broker earns their actual money, right?
Yep.
Like, or the biggest times, right? It's when there's a claim and during a hard market. Those are the two, especially if you're an independent broker, because now you're, obviously trying to soften the blow, or take the edge off, so to speak, right? But part of that, or a big piece of that, is making that submission look as beautiful as possible, right?
Oh yeah.
Because if there is a question, I mean, I've been through it 3 years a row now with one client in the non-emergency medical transport space, where the 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 risk is clean. They have
Hmm.
no losses, but the space is just so awful that even on a risk that has no losses, they're like, this isn't possible. There has
Yeah.
to be a claim. You're screwing us. Like,
Hmm.
these loss runs don't look accurate. You doctored them. Like, like all of those things, you have to button it up to the point where it's like, okay, the underwriter almost doesn't even have to come back to you with any questions. It's just
Hmm.
like, this looks fantastic. Make sure that all of the assets are outlined within the property and business personal property coverage. Make sure that all of the numbers are updated and everything is accurate. I mean, and don't give them any excuse to throw the rate book at you,
Oh
right?
yeah.
Like, uh, just immunize that submission to the point where they can't necessarily take issue with something, and then all of a sudden, I mean, it's like the sweater or the sweatshirt that has like the thread, right? Like, and you're like, you just want to pull it, like it's just a compulsion, right? I've sometimes I'm smart and I just like nip it, but truthfully, if that underwriter just starts pulling at the thread, now all of a sudden, you have half a sweater left, and the submission is just getting raked over the coals. And so part of how you earn your money as a broker unapologetically is
Hmm.
making sure that the submission looks as beautiful as possible.
And getting the insured engaged in this process,
Mm,
because making sure that they understand what's at stake, right? So, I've had clients in the past where they just literally want us to just slap, like white out the signature date, slap a new date on it, and just rinse and repeat, like push it back through, right? And so periodically you have to send it to them blank,
yeah.
and they're like, "Whoa, where are my numbers? What numbers I give you last year?" You're like, "No, no, no. I need you to actually go to your books. I need
Mm,
you to actually go and pull something out." I remember eons ago, I worked for a company system. We filled out a timesheet,
mhm,
but they told us that they wanted the timesheet to be like real time. Like if you worked from 8:30 to 5:30, what's the likelihood that you actually walked in there at 8:30 and 10 seconds on the dot? They
right.
wanted to see the 8:28s and the 8:31s and like the reality of it, right? Because if you just copy and paste it straight down, like
Yeah.
you're not giving us a true reflection of what you're doing, right? And so it's the same way with underwriting. I did a CE course here recently, which was really, helpful and really fascinating. That was entitled getting to the yes, talking about getting, especially the commercial submissions,
Mhm,
telling the story, sharing the info, giving a compelling reason, on why this account makes sense, why it fit, why you thought about it before you sent it to them, whatever the case was. And I think about that as far as first impressions. If it appears that you're being forthcoming and that you're giving accurate, reliable data,
mhm,
then the likelihood of them trusting, like you said, and not wanting to pull that string. But if there's things out there like, wait a minute, what are the chances that 3 years in the row the revenues are spot on, not a dollar more or less than it was? These are going to be things that are going to erode that trust.
yeah.
So we've got to get specific. And then we also have to remember that insurance is just part of a toolbox of things. This is about the transference of risk, right? So I remember years ago gosh, I feel so old saying it out loud. When you actually made interest on a savings account,
Yeah.
remember that? Or even small interest on your checking account,
Hmm.
none of that happens anymore, right? So typically, if you have balances and you can tuck something away into a CD or whatever else, where you can at least get a little bit of interest for your money, it's better than just sitting on it where there's no interest. Same thing with insurance, where they need to come in and make a decision.
Hmm.
Is it better right now, because this is so costly, to maybe increase a deductible and think about some alternative, risk mechanisms,
Yep.
whether they be captives or whatever route you choose to go, and just think about it that way. That, if I increase it by this much, it's going to decrease the price. I can put that into a rainy day fund or wherever else I stick, the money in case something happens, so that I can just weather this storm, and then we can revisit this again, when things start, when we start coming out of this hard market. But looking at coverages, looking at, the figures on your submission, this is how you're going to have to get, again, that engagement piece, instead of just this very passive approach to how they've handled the renewal.
Oh yeah, and so those structural changes to the insurance program can also be part of that, budgeting conversation, the conversation that might lead to, say, like, price increases downstream to the end customer for your insured. Um, and so the key being that you have to work with them to understand what their tolerances are, right?
Hmm.
Like it's almost like it's almost like when I worked in the insurance industry, in the investment
I was like,
industry.
whoa, where'd you go?
Yeah, I've moved on already. I don't even know what I work in now. Um, but when I worked in the personal investment industry, they had you do a risk analysis,
Hmm.
or a risk adversity
What's your
analysis
tolerance? Yep.
for the individual. And what's funny is, like, it was almost like like when times were good, you could always see how the surveys completely changed.
Hmm.
So you really had to do a good job of not just kind of like checking the boxes when the person asks. You had to hold them to task and be
Mm-hmm.
like, no, 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 seriously, like, we're in a good time, the stock market's headed up. I'm telling you, if your stock takes a 5% dip, you're saying, oh, I have absolutely no problem, let it ride. And you're like, really? Like, really? Say that 5% dip happens during a period of time where the stock market is headed sideways, or God forbid, down, right?
Hmm.
Their answers change, right?
Oh yeah.
So you have to keep that in context. Like, are you dealing with a very, um, kind of like risk accepting, right,
Hmm.
and risk appreciating company that is like, you know what? No, that's okay. We know what our weighted average cost of capital is. We know how much money that we're not going to have to spend if we take a higher retention, and if we just build that into either increasing our market share or socking it away and making 2-3% on interest, and making sure to just risk manage the hell out of our operation, we're
Hmm.
going to be better, right? Like, you can almost like it's kind of like the sniff test, because some insureds will be like, oh yeah, sure, just give us a higher deductible, and you're like, whoa, hold on, right? Like, it's just not that easy. You can't
Hmm.
just be like, give me the higher deductible because that's the lower price.
Hmm.
Like, we have some additional work to do here.
Oh yeah.
And to your point with like D&O, it's like that with EPL all the time,
Hmm.
right? Like EPL, it's like, okay, well, you've had some claims issues, and they're like, okay, well, just give us a higher retention. I'm like, so you're not going to try and stop having claims? Like, like, this is just going to get worse, right?
EPL,
Like,
yes. So that is also where, back to that ounce of prevention and that pound of cure, right?
yeah,
There's certain lines of business, especially like your EPL, for example, that if you invest in and
I'm
implement.
still in insurance, Matt. Don't worry.
It's like, wow, like using this show to, to let us know that you've defected. Um, Human resources, right?
Hmm.
Creating an employee manual. Sometimes some of these extra risk management, things that they undertake will also help make that submission look better.
Yeah.
Because you can say, yes, we may have had some issues in the past. This is how we're addressing it. These are the measures that have been put in place. Very similar to what we do post loss anyway, right? Where we're saying, hey, lesson learned. We've tightened up our processes, and so this is what it's going to look like, moving forward. There are
Yeah.
so many different options that are out there, not necessarily the boilerplate stuff that's not going to, be admissible and hold weight, but really, between, third parties that offer it now. I'm not saying everyone's got to go out and hire like an HR manager, but these are the things that not only is it going to help you avoid losses, it's also going to help you reduce costs as well because you can present better on paper. It's
Yeah.
almost the equivalent on the personal line side. If I got a ticket, but then I went to the driving school to make sure those points got removed, right?
Yeah.
We want to make sure that we're doing things and that they understand how interrelated it is. So another point that we haven't really dove really deep into is not underestimating the impact of credit on premiums,
Oh
especially if
yeah.
you have a client that's utilizing like premium finance. We may
Hmm.
not have a whole lot of wiggle room when it comes to the pure premium that's being, charged for the upcoming year, but the percentage that you have to put down, the percentage that you're going to pay on the premiums altogether, those are going to be impacted by pay history,
Hmm.
longevity with a particular, carrier or finance company. And so while it's not huge, it's every dollar counts at this point,
Yeah.
right? And so reminding them that, there are paid in full discounts that exist still, some certain lines of business and certain carriers, if they're able to leverage that, maybe to offset a couple of dollars, if they've got the liquidity to do so.
Hmm.
So we have to get creative in telling them, hey, look, this isn't, again, you're not just, to Heather's point, buckled in and stuck on this ride.
Yeah.
You can still proactively do some things that a lot of these little measures are going to, really help us, survive this upturn right now.
Yeah. And each one of them have like, so this is the difference between, say, a large company that has an in-house risk management department and, say, a mid-size or smaller company that's relying on their insurance and risk management team, that's outside part-time but independent, working with them. And so normally in a larger company they're doing that cost benefit analysis, right?
Hmm.
And they could be doing it in an extremely sophisticated way. With a smaller regional company, you have to do as much as you can feasibly.
Hmm.
Um, and so you're not necessarily going to be putting into place like, a risk management software system that's then going to real time kind of like calculate these, give and take. Excuse me.
Gotcha.
But apparently I'm allergic talking about risk management software programs. But no, they're fantastic. I wish I could afford some of them. But you're talking about a conversation that has a lot of moving parts, and so it takes again, like you're going to work more hours. I can just remember from hard market times where I was like, all right, well, now my work week like looked like 40, 50 hours a week. Now it's 60, right? Not owning my own agency, just as an account executive. My
Hmm.
work week is now 60. And if you're a good agency principal, you're also going to anticipate this stuff and be like, look, our commissions are going to be up because it's hard market. I'm going to have to ask you as the team that's taking care of things. If you're hourly, you're gonna make bank on the overtime, but you're working overtime, right? We just have to get it out the door, and so that is something that goes hand in hand with like you're going to be doing a lot of after hours analysis or running of numbers and balancing spreadsheets and stuff like that, and then during the day that's the psychological hand holding, walking people off the cliff part of the job. And so that's really what it amounted to me. Like that division of labor, that's what I thought of during hard markets. It was like, okay, 9 to 5 is I have customer service, just try and kind of like be that hand holder
Hmm.
kind of mentality. And then my, after 5 p.m. hat was number crunching, putting together different coverage towers or risk management, programs, trying to fill gaps. And a lot of times the underwriters are in the same boat too. Like,
Oh
what's
yeah.
funny is during a hard market, you typically don't have a problem getting an underwriter after they're supposed to stop their business hours. Whereas during a soft market, it's like, oh, it's 5. The whistle blows. They're like,
Oh yeah.
I'm out. Which it's just, I mean, everyone works more hours during a hard market. But did you have a similar experience where it was like, you kind of had those, like, 2 jobs, like one during the day and one
Oh
in the
yeah.
evening?
Because you have to be able to justify, for example, the knee-jerk reaction, especially the ones that have boards that have to prove changes. And they may have it set where it's like anything that's outside of a 5 to 10%, it's required that we shop, right? And you get that
Yeah,
email, it's like, no, not the required we shop answer. This is,
yeah,
this is the kiss of death. This means something that I could have just gone onto a portal and hit bind. Now I have to pull it out. I have to repackage it. I got to send it out. And a lot of them, again, depending on how big or sophisticated the board, they may want the response back, right? They want to see
mm,
what those other quotes were. They want to understand why those declined. They want to understand, what due diligence did we put in, to satisfy, the need, that's being, requested. Exactly. The underwriters, they're also, trying to look at things and figure out, can we make this make sense? Is this still going to be good business? Is it going to be profitable?
yep,
And so, I had an account a couple years ago. And again, this is when, my book of business was very much remote from where I was. And so going in and sitting down was not an option, right?
yep,
So, I'm just, because I think it was a 7-1, and we all know the dreaded 7-1s, right? So I'm just slinging stuff. And that's another thing too. If you're used to cutting it close, you cannot get away with doing that anymore.
no.
So I don't know if you're 30, 60 days prior, as far as when your goal is to have your stuff out, you've got to get it out sooner than later so that you can find out if you're going to need to do anything else in the interim, right?
Oh,
Um,
hard markets. That 60 to 90 day timeline stretched out sometimes to 180 days.
oh yeah,
We'd have
you
we'd have
have to.
underwriters look at a renewal like 6 months ahead. Not that we were expecting a quote, but yeah, we have
Oh
them
yeah,
looking at it like 6 months ahead. Yeah,
because you don't know what's going to happen, right? And so you got to have all of your plays lined up in case one doesn't go through, then you know what you're doing next. So anyhow, this particular account, it was an A&E account, it was an architect engineer account,
mhm,
and I remember getting the call, and I think it was even the CEO, like someone I never hear from, right? And they're like, "Precious, what are you doing? This is like third year in a row. This thing is just jumping. It's just out of control. Like, what is happening?" Right. And so, again, we just kind of get into this. Sometimes it's just muscle memory, right? I have this
yeah,
checklist. Did I get this from them? I just forward it along. Make sure that the document is labeled right. I'm like, okay, well, these are financials. These are this. I didn't look at anything, right? I just
mhm,
basically picked it up and scooped it up and, sent it along. And so, he was like, "We need to talk. Like, we cannot do this." So I actually pull it out, reach out to the underwriters, like, "Hey, walk me through what were the big changes, what were the big levers," right? Got on a call. Everyone got on the call. The carrier is actually gracious enough to get on the call with me.
yeah,
And we went through line by line. Like, look, when it came to this question, you answered 25%. We like to see that between 15 and 20. So, that caused this to go high. So we went and we combed through it. So the end result of all of that, we weren't able to do anything that year because the submission was what the submission was and the price was the price. I actually got a thank you email from the client saying, "Hey, you know what? That was really helpful because we have choices on who we do business with and what kind of business we do, and knowing that." Again, if we're going to get paid the same, but if you're telling me it's more costly to do residential than commercial, or it's more costly to do multifamily versus, single family, then we can actually change how we operate so that we can increase our margins. And so it went from a do something or we're out of here to a thank you call, right? And it was
mm,
just because the client now had visibility because again, I don't know how they run their business. I'm assuming that it's all locked in when in reality,
right.
if they're aware, they can make changes too. And so taking that extra step, combing through it. If something comes back and it's undesirable, there's no harm in asking,
Mhm.
"Hey, underwriter, was there something in particular here that was out of line that caused it? Was it just a rate increase overall? Can you help me?" And I've even written emails that have said just that, "Help me give this client some context." If I
Yeah.
can't give them context, we're both out of this renewal.
That's like now I'm imagining Precious in like Jerry Maguire, like help me, help you. Like come on, like
Yes!
some give and take
We
here,
both
right?
want this. This is a good account. I need you to like ghostwrite for me, man. Just send me the email that I can just slap my signature on it forward so that I'm not just out here going, you win some, you lose some. Like that's not what they're wanting to hear.
Yeah.
So yeah, these clients, again, this is really where we shine. This is
Yeah.
where we get to tell them how, what, when, where, and more importantly, when we're able to say, so look, case in point, I just had another, image from this weekend. So we're going through the drive-through, getting something for my 7-year-old, and we ordered at the window. We ordered at the speaker, pulled up, and the guy comes to the window, the manager, and he says, "So, got some good news and bad news." He's like, "The bad news is we're out of the menu item that you ordered, but I've got a plan." I was like, "Oh."
All
I want
right.
to hear this. He's like, "So
I'm
what we're gonna
curious
do
now.
is," I was like, "The man has a plan because he is not reversing this transaction. I've already paid for it." So he kind of explained, he's like, "We're gonna take this," and he was like, "Better than the original, ma'am. I guarantee you, he's gonna enjoy it better than the original." I was like, "Hey, I'm sold, right? I'll take it," because he didn't just say, "Sorry, 86 fries," right? It was like,
Yeah. You're
"This is
SOL.
what's going on."
Yeah.
But let me tell you what our options are. I've taken the liberty of doing these things in anticipation that this wasn't going to be, acceptable.
Mhm.
So this is also where you build that rapport. This is when you, like I said, you earn your keep, and they're
Yeah.
like, "That's why I do business with this place, and I'm gonna ride it out because
Mhm.
they take care of me."
Yeah. Yeah. No, and that's a huge point is and this transcends just, sales during a hard market. That aspect of you know, delivering bad news, so to speak,
Hmm.
or just when things aren't, obviously aren't going to be satisfactory to the client. And it may or may not have been something that you flubbed, right? It could
Hmm.
just be a market dynamic that's doing it. But I love that story. Like, like good news, bad news. Like, I'll give you the bad news first. Like, this is where you think like things are going to fall short. The good news is that there's this other thing that maybe you didn't even think about that like it's like what's the show? Let's make a deal, right? Like where it's like, you want behind curtain number one or curtain number two, or do
Oh
you want the
yeah.
box? Like, it's like, well, look, I know this is going to fall short of your expectations
Hmm.
because of this. So you already win a point there because the insured is like, okay, well, this person doesn't have their head up their rear. They understand that this is going to be a
Hmm.
disfavorable situation. Then you say, okay, like this is all the alternative. Like it doesn't stop there. It's like, but there's more, right? Like there is something that now you're like, okay, there's a gap. I realize that there's a gap. This is how I think we can fill it.
Hmm.
And so that at least keeps you in the game, and it keeps you from, like you said, getting backdoored or running the risk of losing to an even worse quote.
Hmm.
Because I've had that happen too, where it was like in a hard market, if communication wasn't done properly, the quote that the client went with might have been the same price, and the insured felt like they were getting screwed by us, and so they
Hmm.
went with the quote that was the same price, and you're like, but sir, this has been gutted. Like there's no like this is
Oh
an
yeah.
Ahmed coverage. This isn't full blown
Hmm.
workers comp. Like you're giving away the farm here. But the problem is that because the communication wasn't ideal, it ended you lost or the client lost faith in what you
Yes,
were telling them, right?
absolutely.
And so yeah, that I think that's a huge point. Like walking in not just with your hat in your hand, but also and another option that can come to the table that can like at least address the situation. It might not completely fix it, but it might take the edge off or lessen the pain a little bit is also a huge deal.
And the
Um,
delivery, because especially as an
mm,
independent, I think this is part of where we're tempted to go, but they are we. You
Yeah.
know, so when we start throwing markets under the bus, oh, those guys over at such and such, they're giving me a hard time. The client does not care. That
Yes.
is your appointment. That is your relationship. You're an extension of they. So never try to go in and do this good cop, bad cop where and blame it on someone else,
Hmm.
right? And then it's delivery, right? Because
Yeah.
again, I like to prepare ahead of time before I give bad news so that I can have that I can go right into it, right? I can say, hey, look, so here, I reached down, I got these numbers back. These are what these numbers look like. But before we panic, like, let's talk about what we're going to do. First and foremost, let's look at this. Is
Yeah.
this really actually what you need right now? Are these numbers accurate? Is this headcount accurate? Do you still have all these buildings? Whatever, right? Start going through it, right? And saying, okay, because if you look at this and it has the different pricing out next to it, so we can go back and we can maybe look at adjusting what we have. Or
Hmm.
sometimes to your point, because sometimes people are irrational. Oh, they have their nerve trying to increase that on me. And now they're just angry, right? And
Yeah.
it's an emotional thing. You're like, hey, that's okay because we have other options. And so this is what we're going to do. Wanted to show it to you first because on the flip side, some insureds just have an ironclad loyalty to the carrier, oftentimes
Hmm.
after like a favorable loss experience. Oh, when I had that claim, they came out and they held the umbrella, they served the best cocoa, whatever.
Yeah.
They're in love, right? And so
Yeah.
they're like, oh, okay, I've been with them a long time. I don't want to go through the hassle of flipping. I've already got a portal. I can go in and manage whatever, right? My staff's ready trained on how to use this stuff. And so I'm like, okay, just wanted to make sure, that you were okay with that, because that's the other thing too. Be prepared, be proactive, but don't automatically assume the worst
Yeah.
because if you go in and you're just like, oh, this sucks, they're getting over on both of us, this is terrible, they may have been okay with it. They
Hmm.
may have already, adjusted for it, and you're the one that's gone in now, in panic. So just really kind of figure out what their pain points are. Make sure that you're using this as an opportunity to express that, hey, we're in this together. I want to do whatever is going to make you feel most comfortable.
Yep.
Yes, it's not a lot of great options right now. And then I like to divert the attention, but next year, let's go ahead and get this bound because next year we're going
Yeah.
to come back and we're going to get in front of this a little bit sooner, because sometimes when you're running out of time, that's really the play.
Yeah.
Let's just get this done. Keep your nose clean for the next 12 months. This is going to move into the reserves. This is going to move into the, whatever. And, we'll be better off moving
Yeah.
forward.
Like my brain's exploding right now because there's like three different points I want to make. And Mike Caselny is on board with me with at least part of one. He said, "Don't ever throw the carrier under the bus." I agree. There might
Never.
be some very rare exceptions to that, but for the most part, like 99.99999% of the time, don't ever throw the carrier under the
Hmm.
bus. Okay. Same thing with other brokers. Don't trash talk other brokers.
Oh,
Just
yeah.
don't. Because as much as you think it's winning you points with that insured, they now look at you as someone who is more willing to sling mud about someone else than talk
Hmm.
about your positives. Yes, exactly, Mike. Unless they're jerks. Um, I can tell you in close confidence between you, me, and the bunches of people that will watch this on
Yes.
the public internet. Sometimes you can talk negatively about a government program that provides insurance. But I'm just saying, like, sometimes. That's why I said 0.99999% of the time. Okay, so that was one point. The second point was your marketing summary is one of the most important things that you will put in front of the client.
Hmm.
Okay, show the client which markets you went to, what the responses were, the range, right? If they
Oh, yeah.
wouldn't quote it, this also goes, this is really important also when it's a piece of business that most years you have to place E&S,
Hmm.
right? So like if you have to place it E&S, first of all, it's you have to from a regulatory standpoint, you have to do this.
Do your due
But
diligence. Yeah.
it's really important you put it in front of the client because the client's going to come back to you with like, oh, well, we removed a vehicle, and you're like, I'm sorry, you're paying a minimum premium with an E&S
Hmm.
carrier. I can't do anything, right? And then they're going to ask why. So that marketing summary is imperative. When they see, we went to 20 markets,
Oh, yeah.
and it's like, 3/4 of them are rejects. A bunch of them are like wouldn't even be price competitive. A couple of them threw out a number, and it just wasn't even, it wasn't even the realm of possibility. And then
Hmm.
we presented you with the two or three options that were, actually within some kind of sane universe. Like that's what we did. And so when they're like, "Wow, holy crap!" Like, okay, things must suck, right? They understand that. And then
Mm-hmm.
the last piece of it is something that we talked about when we did the episode on upselling, right?
Mm-hmm.
The idea that you're kind of putting the, you know, choose whatever car you want, like the Tesla, you know, the Honda, and then the Kia or whatever, right? Like when you put those in front of
Mm-hmm.
the client, it gives them some kind of context about what their buying options are.
Absolutely.
When it's a hard market, I like to show them worst case scenario first
Yeah.
and just be like, look, this is where we started. Which, by the way, they're used to because it happens with health insurance all the
All the
time.
time. Mm-hmm.
And what's funny is the moment I start talking about hard markets with property and casualty insurance, uh, the joke that I typically use after the renewal is now I know what health brokers feel like
Oh wow.
every
Yeah.
year, right?
Oh yeah.
But so that is something that can also put the conversation in a certain amount of context, right? Like this is where we started. We started at plus 20.
Mm-hmm.
And the client is like, "Oh my god, like
Then what
doomsday."
happened?
Like, "Oh, right? Like we started at plus 20." But
Yes.
the good it's like I have a plan, right? Like but I had a plan
Oh yeah.
and where we're at right now is we're plus 11,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's a difference of this amount of money and you know you are or aren't having to give up this amount of coverage or whatever. And all of a sudden the client is like, okay, well, they didn't just sit on their hands
Right.
and you know just sit there and count the $100 bills like Scrooge McDuck, right? Like they actually worked for their money and we went
Yes.
to all these markets in order to achieve this, you know, alpha or delta in
Oh
what
yeah.
you're going to end up paying.
And then that way they don't feel the need to go externally, right? Because if
Yes.
they feel like you're just in the back pocket of one or two and they're like, okay, well, maybe I need to cast a wider net, and then you're getting blocked in markets because you're shopping and they're not telling you they're shopping, so this way you've already covered your bases and they should have that confidence now.
Ooh, so this is I know we're running long, but this is a question of etiquette, I guess. I mean, it could be a strategic question. Um, do you sandbag? Do you anonymize your quotes if you know that there's a possibility that they could cut bait and go to another broker and try and get other options? Like, what is your thought process? Because I've worked in shops that had different points of view. One was we'll let the client know where we are in the process, but we're not letting them know carrier name. We're not letting them know the final rate that we're at. We'll let them know ahead of time what the worst case scenario is, but we won't let them know the final rate that we're at. And then I've had other shops that are just like, no, we put it out there as soon as we possibly can, right? And if the client wants to go out and find a better option, we just prep them and say, look, at least give us last look so we can look at what you're being presented with and make sure that you're not getting screwed over. I mean, what's your thought process on it?
So I'm a little bit of a broker diva, right? And so
It-
I
it-
sell them very
if it's
hard.
not just me, then
I
you
don't
got to put
play
a ring on it.
I don't play second fiddle. I really don't. I explain to them that this is not the world of personal lines where you call 1-800 this and 1-800 that and you can call
Mm,
multiple people. I work for you. If you don't feel like I'm working hard enough for you or if you're dissatisfied with what I do, let's like clear the air and do that. But if
yep.
you want me to proceed, I need to have a little bit of confidence that we're working exclusively so that you can allow me to do what I do. I explain to customers too that also what's difficult is when a market gets multiple submissions and they don't match. And so then it's going to be like, well, who's off, right? And
Yeah.
so I explain, sometimes it causes confusion, markets are blocked and things like that. I just need your commitment, if we're going to go in and do this together, that you do want to work with us. Like I nail down the relationship before I nail down the renewal, you know,
Mhm.
because most of, again, it's a little bit ballsy to do this, right? And you have to know that you've executed all year long,
Mhm.
where you just remind them, hey, it's been a pleasure working with you. I'm looking forward to working with you again this upcoming year. This is what I'm getting ready to do. Do you have any questions or concerns about it? Do I basically have your commitment that if we land on something, we're going to work together another year?
Right.
Um, so yeah, I kind of if I can't get that, then I just don't.
Fair enough. I don't disagree. I mean, I think it's you can tell a lot you can tell a lot about the relationship that you've built with your client by hard markets,
Hmm.
right? If they are immediately going to find someone else to get competing quotes, then you might think, like, if you're taking a very introspective, like an egotistical standpoint from it, you're like, oh, how dare they? Like, they didn't even give us a shot, right? Like,
Hmm.
uh, but the answer is that when things were quiet,
Hmm.
you just didn't do a good enough of a job of letting them understand that you were, you know, killing yourself for their account.
Yes. Hmm.
And that is something that immediately manifests itself in, that they cut bait the first chance that there was, some kind of issue or something that they were worried about, that maybe they didn't expect you to be able to come out with the best option, so to speak,
Hmm.
right? And so that says a lot. Like, it says a lot about, and again, you don't know that that's the case until it actually happens.
Oh yeah.
So, when times are quiet and everything's going easy, um, I like the for me, the best relationship builders are the ones that they're the brokers that are always worried.
Hmm.
Like, even when times are good and someone's like, "Oh, you did a good job." And like, you shake hands, you get out of the meeting or something like that, and then like you turn to each other and you're like, "Wait a minute. Good job. What do they mean good job? Like, just okay, like, just average, or like
Hmm.
great? Like, do they ever tell anyone good job? Like, you're micro analyzing it, but you know what? That kind of what people would consider paranoia, I find is actually really positive, because during the good times is when you actually end up building that relationship
Hmm.
where, when it finally hits the fan. I tell every single client, I know the way that I've done my job is when it hits the fan, even if it doesn't have to do with insurance, I'm the first person you call. Like, or,
Exactly.
or one or two, right? Um, I know I've done my job. Or, if you're stuck for a babysitter and you're like, hey, Matt, what are you doing Friday night? You know, uh, I'm being a little facetious, but, I would be remiss to tell you that there are a couple of clients that I would watch their children. I would make sure to take out an insurance policy first. But so yeah, so I think that's the answer. I mean, you can play with whatever games you want, but really during hard markets, it also is a truth serum. It shows you what kind of relationship you've built
Oh yeah.
built with your client. So look, any final thoughts on hard market brokering?
Man, we're all in it together. I mean, this
Mm,
is just kind of, the landscape, the nature of the beast, if you will. And so, I mean, just keeping your, tools sharp, tuning in for things like this, getting little tidbits. It's kind of like a buffet, right? You might not, adapt, might not take on everything that we've suggested, but if you pick up one or two pieces and you're able to make a sandwich out of it, eat it.
yeah. Just in north in northeastern Italian parlance, just a little finucci. You just need a little taste, right? Like, you get a little bit from here, a little bit from there, and you're ahead of the game, so to speak.
There you
So
go.
and complacency is a four-letter word. It is for your clients and it is for you. So you
Oh
just got to
yeah,
remember that. But
absolutely.
anyway, that was another Sell Like a CPCU. We
Yes.
will be back next Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central. We will have broker Brett
Wait,
with
you said
us.
Thursday, Wednesday or Thursday?
Oh, sorry, Wednesday.
You
Yes,
scared me. I was like, "Oh,
I've
hold on."
time doesn't matter anymore in this world. Yeah, next Wednesday we will be back on at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, with broker Brett. I even forget what we talked about that we were going to be talking about, but it's going to be.
It's
It's
always a
always
good time.
interesting with broker Brett. It's always a
It
good time.
is.
He's got his thumb on the pulse of a lot of things that
Mhm.
are cutting edge and current and insure techie and all kinds of stuff. So, in fact, I think who's he with now? Rethought? Is he with Rethought?
I'm not sure. So, yeah, because Brett's connected to so many different places.
Or he might have actually gone to do consulting or work with Purple Ant too, because he was initially who introed us to them. So yeah, no, it's going to be fun. I mean, there's going to be tons of stuff. He's maybe what I'll do is I'll just cut off my mic and just let him go. You know.
No, this is gonna be a mashup show. This is gonna be fun.
Yes,
So yeah, you guys don't want to miss it.
Yes. So don't miss it. Make sure that you're subscribed and you hit the notification bell. And we will see you next week. Bye, everyone.
All right, see ya.